Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Volta Foundation webinar series, where battery industry experts delve into trending topics. Today, we have two amazing speakers joining us, Kyle Vugler, battery systems engineer and technical account manager at Siemens, and his guest, Bjorn Stoll, president and CEO at Digatron. They're here to share insights on building sustainable battery ecosystems by harnessing the power of the digital twin. My name is Myra, and I'm the Director of Member Success at Volta Foundation. Thank you to everyone for joining in today. Hi, Kyle. Hi, Bjorn.
Hello. Hello, everyone.
Hello, hello, hello.
Good
If this
morning,
is your
good
first,
afternoon, good evening.
good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world today. For the audience, if this is your first time joining a Volta Foundation program, welcome officially to the largest network of battery professionals globally. Our webinar series is one of about 15 programs organized by Volta Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting the growth of the battery industry. We've hosted over 30 in-person and virtual events just within this year. Whew. We produce industry-leading publications like the annual battery report, This Week in Batteries and Battery Bits. We focus on DEI efforts through our Women in Batteries program, as well as host the largest virtual battery career fair within the industry. Everything we do is open access and centered on helping companies and professionals like you and the audience, like our speakers today, connect, collaborate, and advance your businesses and careers. If you're wondering, if you've read the annual battery report and you're wondering how something like this resource can be open access, Volta Foundation is 100% supported by our partners and member companies like Siemens. Thank you so much, Kyle. Thank you to everyone sincerely on this list, as well as to our 50,000 plus professional members globally for your support, dedication to help make these opportunities possible. All right. And just in case, in addition to today's program, be sure to check out Battery Street, Volta Foundation Slack channel, catch up on past content on Volta Foundation's YouTube channel, subscribe to our newsletters, and be sure to register for our upcoming events within the next couple of weeks. Battery Pub, Battery Forum, Battery Career Fair, all listed on Volta Foundation's website. And Kyle, Bjorn, and I, we're planning to meet up in Norway for the Battery Pub event. So we'll see
I'm in.
everyone in the audience there. Okay, now that everyone's familiar with Volta Foundation, just a quick note about the platform so that everyone can make the event more effective. For the audience, on your screen in the upper right corner, you'll see two sections. One is a little icon with a question mark, and two is a little gear icon. Those are the two I'd like you to pay attention to right now. The first, the little question mark, during the program, enter your questions in this space, and the presenters will come back on after the presentation and answer any and all questions that we can get to within the time we have. Still enter your questions, even if we don't have time. The presenters will be able to see these and can follow up with you after the program. The second is the little gear icon. It helps with any audio issues that you might have or experience throughout the program. If you are having technical issues, you can also enter it into the question or chat, and someone from the Volta Foundation team will be in the background to assist. Hopefully we'll be able to assist. All right, we're familiar with Volta Foundation, familiar with the platform. Let's meet our speakers today. Kyle Vugler, joining us from Siemens, is a battery systems engineer and technical account manager. Kyle is an electrical engineer and has been in the automation industry for 16 years, having held positions in hardware design, control software development, field service commissioning, program management, R&D, and controls engineering management. His experience ranges from combustion systems, agrochemical, pulp and paper, aerospace, life sciences, consumer electronics, food and beverage, logistics, robotics, and most significantly, in automotive and battery industry. That's still so many industries, Kyle. It's amazing.
I've been all over it. Yeah.
Yeah, you're all over. Prior to joining Siemens, Kyle worked for Matthews Company, ABB, and most recently at Tesla at both the Fremont and Austin facilities, where he acted as controls engineer manager for the advanced automation engineering team and cell manufacturing. Thanks for joining us, Kyle.
It's a pleasure
All
to be
right.
here. Thanks.
Yeah. And we have Bjorn Stoll joining Kyle today. Bjorn is the president and CEO of Digatron and is an accomplished business leader with significant international experience, having worked and lived across Europe, Africa, Asia, and the US. He's been everywhere. Multiple passports, he said. Formerly COO and board member of the largest cryogenic valve company in India and the Southeast Asia, Bjorn now serves as CEO and president of Digatron Power Electronics USA and Quench Americas. He spearheads advancements in EV charging infrastructure, energy storage, and batteries throughout the Americas. All right, Colin Bjorn,
Thanks.
I'm going to turn off my camera and hand it over to you for today's topic. Thanks so much.
Perfect. Thank you, Myra, for the gracious introduction. I appreciate it. What I want to give today, I'll turn off my camera for the sake of bandwidth here. Myra essentially came to us in both Digatron and Siemens and wanted to put something forward to the industry in terms of digital twin, some of the R&D design decisions that are coming out of lab environments, universities, academia. But how are we taking some of those findings using digital twin to actually go through that Death Valley gap of going into production, into basically turning a coin cell into an actual cell for production for people to use within industry. Some of the key takeaways that we've identified, both myself and Bjorn, were what can we do to use some of these tools, or the questions people are asking for accelerating manufacturing ramp up, for the design and production synergy. I want to make a call out here in terms of some of those design decisions become exponential downstream to many different stakeholders. Thirdly, I would say the global partnership for production scaling, where Digatron's really going to speak to what they do with manufacturers, tool builders, system integrators, looking for some of the solutions. And then also enhancing market readiness in terms of what we're using on those digital twin systems, how to improve, iterate, and better the next variant of those tools. Okay. So firstly, I want to explain my role within Siemens as a technical account manager. I tend to be a guide in some cases. Sometimes it feels like cheating. I've done a lot of these problems over and over and over again for the last 5 years at Tesla and others. But a lot of these customers are really starting to understand the value of digital twins. And every battery manufacturer, tool builder, system integrator is at a different point in their life cycle of defining the problem, solving the problem, and then expanding that problem solution set. I want to give the industry at large here on the call today an idea of what I'm seeing, regardless of customer, form factor, chemistry, whatever that might be, what we're asking ourselves and how we're helping solve some of those solutions. So firstly, a lot of the simulation of old from aerospace and automotive, it really becomes what are the limiting factors or front-end engineering simulation tools to define some of those key metrics. We do this in academia, we do that in research and development. We do this to define what is it we're trying to achieve on a simulation basis. Also, the one that really has been a fair hold over the last decade has been, how do I calculate my orchestrated operations? If I need to do 5 gigawatt or 10 gigawatt, how many tools do I need? Do they orchestrate well together? Is there a need for a buffer system? What's my consumption rate? That has been a simulation tool many years that we've been using within industry. What we're starting to see within, especially in the battery industry, is in terms of how can I verify that process is in fact what it is? You might be a manufacturer sourcing from 20 different tool suppliers, and double checking math, assuming heuristics and assumptions are actually valid, becomes very important. And there's a bit of an abstract aspect in terms of some of those turnkey systems designed for a market or safety requirements over in Asia may differ from the US. We want to validate some of those safety systems for our operators, workforce, and our engineers that are around some of these tools today. What we're also starting to see is as we go out of a 100 megawatt production world and we go into 1, 10, 20, 40 gigawatt scope, understanding what are the core dependencies between those tools. It's very hard to find one manufacturer that can deliver every single manufacturing tool for your process that you've defined. And they may not care about their neighbor on how it works with those upstream or downstream systems. So a lot of teams are starting to understand, how can I simulate the orchestration, interlock permissive mechanism between those tools? Do they work well together? Can I scale that broadly? Secondly, what I want to point out here is the nature of a lot of these engineering workflows. Regardless of the industry that you're in, this somewhat holds true, but it's really exacerbated in battery. A, due to the startup nature of a lot of these organizations. B, just it is a new industry. There's nothing novel about the battery industry. It all comes from other industries. What's unique about it is it's a Frankenstein's monster of many different industries. So you're finding different engineering practices, how we approach a problem, how we work together, that's still being harmonized. The most important thing that I like to draw attention to here is a lot of the chemistry and process definition and direction really goes into every different stakeholder. You need to understand, as a process engineer, safety engineer, controls engineer, a lot of those decisions affect your day-to-day next steps, verification, deployment, and vice versa. If someone changes something over here, it affects someone downstream or upstream as well. I want to give an example of how that becomes a problem at scale. So say you're in the research and development team and you're looking to just do something simple as, I want to change from NMC 811 to NMC 955. You're not going from NMC to LFP, you're not going from pouch to prismatic, you're not doing like a vanadium battery change from a lithium ion, you're just changing the recipe within your dosing. But downstream, you start to see drastic effects as it goes down to the different organizations, and it becomes exponential in nature. And I'll explain why the simulation tools and how they're interconnected helps kind of bridge that gap. So in NMC world, you're going to change something like the amount of kgs of your binder, active materials. Those will have different physical properties, and they will have possibly different means by which you can measure bimodal distribution or compression or thickness of your electrode. Everything will change based on just changing something like this. And you're changing that for that reason, to actually have a better battery. Now, what those teams in the R&D team are doing is they are trying to solve for these key quality gates, as it were. Like, we want to have a defined particle size or a different modal distribution or a viscosity or a granularity test for dispersion. They're defining based off this, those will change. Now, in order to achieve this, the automation needs to program itself to attain this. So that process R&D team, they simulate, they define this, and this team needs to achieve this. So this change here affects this, therefore we affect this. When it comes to the controls and automation side, and even the mechanical side, a simple change like this can change, okay, my dosing time is radically different now. I need to change the program by which that machine runs, and then now the startup and shutdown of that tool affects an upstream or downstream tool, and so on and so forth. But the goal here, I hope the team starts to take away, is in terms of a small decision, asterisk on small here, from NMC, just the dosing recipe or the chemistry massively affects people downstream when it comes to this. Now, how do we tend to see this play out when it comes to industry? There's three main hallmarks when you're tending to approach this problem. Some of these things, your organization might not have the stomach to digest how big your appetite might be, but more or less this holds true. The beginning stages of defining what is your chemistry, what is your process, those teams are looking to solve for what are the key parameters for quality. What are the things that I need to attain in a coin cell that I need to take out of a lab into mass production? The second wave tends to come with defining your process. For simulations tools here, they tend to be more focused less on what are the key parameters to build, but more so how do I define the process by which I can do this at an industrial level, at scale, repeatable, resilient level. Within Siemens, we have aspects like CFD modeling or full-blown front-end engineering, multi-day, multi-hour simulation tools to define this, from atomic all the way up to CFD modeling. Now, this is an art form, to say the least, but what we're starting to see in battery today is the tie points of that front-end engineering into the actual automation and how we can play with that interlock system. We're seeing a mass adoption here is in terms of simulating the automation and the manufacturing tools together. So when it comes to orchestration, you may want to simulate something like the PLC to validate the startup or shutdown sequence, a safety event, an e-stop event. This becomes far more important when it comes to battery and some of these continuous processes. The analog or the analogy I tend to tell people, or use case I tend to show people, when we design safety for these tools, let's say it's a compression system, and I have a large calendar. When you have an e-stop programmed into that system, A, they take hours to start up to shut down, but B, the e-stop is meant to protect your operators, or possibly the process in that case. There may be a hidden ramification for that e-stop. Say you hit that e-stop, yes, you protect an operator from being crushed, pinched, whatever that might be, but it might come with a $100,000 price tag to resurface your calendar facing over in Switzerland, or something to that effect. Being able to simulate, A, how does this tool individually, startup, shutdown, safety, how does it work itself together is important. But especially when you go to the gigafactory scale, how does my mixer dose into my compression system? How does my compression system and my coating system, how do they feed into my slitters? When I have these different tools, how do I work them together? This is what we're starting to see a lot of adoption in the industry in terms of validating this today. Hallmark here, like I said, there's front-end simulation tools for defining what your quality is and how you build your cell. 2 is the process by which you do that at a scale. And 3 is defining what your throughput is and how does it all work together. So you're looking at quality first and foremost. Second, yield. If you're going to be selling batteries and you have 10% yield, you're going to go out of business. 3, throughput. You're a battery company. You might as well have a good throughput in terms of producing cells that you're looking to achieve. Now, I want to give an example of some of this proactive validation that we're seeing across the battery side of things. This is an example in terms of kind of tying those simulation from a top-down approach in this example towards the production line. So in this case, this is showing that play and how they somewhat do overlap and they can feed back into each other to characterize maybe I need a twin blade mixer, or maybe I need a different 40-ton compression on this electrode film because I have a different ratio up here. In this case, you might change your recipe. You might have a higher compression percentage that's required. You need to validate if I add Si or silicon, if I want to go into this road and altering the more modern anode side of things, getting into the material properties of like a Young's modulus and looking at thermal conductivity, this tends to live in this world up here. But you're still solving for something that these need to achieve. So if you take nothing away from today, there's many different digital twin and simulations that are available to you. Not everything is one size fit all because you do need massive data modeling to do atomic structure simulation, where you don't need to do that when it comes to other applications. But those key parameters that you're defining up here are what this is achieving. So this is where we link them all together at Siemens today. So you're analyzing, you're finding these parameters. This is that Goldilocks zone of this team interfacing with the other teams. And quite honestly, the more modern, how do I integrate them together and automate this together? uh, of the past, you would see different teams focus on these little silos and these different things, and these different skill sets. What you're starting to see is a deliverable come out of this characterizes this. So maybe some teams might be doing both now. Or this team that would just do typically PLC programming is simulating their PLC and giving it to a simulation team or tying it into the plant design natively now. You're all working together on these same parameters, and the beauty of a lot of these systems is they're agnostic to the platform, so they can really integrate well together. In the past, somewhat, and if they weren't linked, someone would change something down here. It would not be reflected on the main line throughput design. Like say we change a proximity switch on a pallet. This is no longer equivalent to what's on the production floor. It can die and wither on the vine in some cases here. Now I want to give you two, we'll call it thought practices in terms of how I'm seeing this play out as well. The first one is a top-down simulation approach. This is more of an early days critical path. I have Sequoia funding. I need to get C-Series out the door. I need to start get some ROI on my business. Those organizations have a really good understanding on what it is they're trying to achieve for the parameters set. That's great. In most cases, you're starting to see, I have an idea of what my line needs to be, how I should size it, how many lines, but they're black boxes. And then they look out to tooling suppliers to say, hey, solve this one box of the 20 boxes according to my parameters. And then as that process plays out, you start to understand, I have no idea maybe how that machine works at the fine-tune level. I have a general idea of this tool. I have a really good understanding because maybe I have a novel process on how I coat or how I do a certain process in the system. But you're starting to get a general idea of how those work together. And this is really where the problem of simulation tends not to take too much of a hold here. The modern advancements of the last 4 years of our communication speed and compute capability allow us to go to this bottom-up approach as well. So you can still start with the top-down, rough it all out into these different chunks that you can solve and move forward with. But now that we have the ability to take the PLC data and the actual automation quality parameters, we can start to push that back up into that production line model instead of, I have a 80 meter a minute metric for my coding line. No, I want to tell you the exact speed ported from the servo drive on my coding roller journal, my main drive line. We're bringing those into the line simulation to say, sure, you can simulate it. We can now take it and characterize that based on real world characterizations and observations. And what you're starting to see is you can actually go through and figure out bandwidths or phases or gates that you can see on the different particle sizes. If I go past this threshold, I really need to radically change my production line or my manufacturing tooling provider because of this. That is incredibly important for the team to hopefully kind of take away here. This here is kind of an overview of what I depicted earlier. It's really more an aspect of, I want to make sure people understand there's definitely a time and a place to understand what is my simulation in the early days for understanding the atomic structure of my cell, maybe a smaller market, more niche. There is a OEM tool builder system integrator suite in terms of understanding how should I design this specific tool or optimize it or iterate upon that. And then also lastly, there is a massive push for creating digital twins to validate sequences. Me personally, I did not want to go do a factory acceptance test over in Korea or over in Switzerland, wherever that might be. If I can virtually take a look at this program, validate it is correct for what I need, I'm not going to go over to a supplier, yell at them for color codes and naming conventions on the automation. I'm going to use my time well. Second to that, operations for battery. All of you are very familiar with this. We tend not to want to start and shut down these production lines. So training your operator and your workforce in a virtual environment that doesn't have a ramification for an e-stop or a plugging of a loss in weight feeder, wherever that might be, it really de-risks your operations and training and your iterative design for the future. Lastly, what I'll say is with this is more of a US topic. I'm seeing a lot of manufacturers. Maybe you're a tool builder and you source to Georgia Pacific in the converting industry, or you do food and beverage boxing as like a Tetra Pak of others. They know web handling and coding quite well, honestly. Um, they're looking to say, hey, what if I just throw electrode into this instead of pulp and paper? The digital twin allows them to create their tool, validate some of those metrics in place of saying, I want to buy a $3 million OPEX, build the tool, then figure out if I can do this and sell it to someone. This is one of the unlocking aspects of tool builders within the US today to say, can I move from that industry over? I don't want to bring lithium into my building. I don't want to spend $9 million on a formation, aging, and test structure and float $9 million for a year long. I want to create this, show it to my potential customers, and I've already done 30-40% of the design work for when they give me a PO to move forward with this. So it's really helping deleverage industry adoption into battery as well, which has been really helpful in the US. Okay. Aside from that, I wanted to paint the ecosystem as I'm seeing it across manufacturers, OEM tool builders, and system integrators. Now that we can understand at least the ecosystem of what people are asking and the take rate for things, I really want to hand this off to Bjorn, who can speak to what they've been doing at Digatron in terms of the tool design and using some of the digital twin aspects. Bjorn, it's all you.
Thank you very much, Kyle. And handing it over to me. As we discussed it at the beginning when we prepared our presentation, like my focus in my previous role was like using Industry 4.0, IoT, Internet of Things, digital twins more on the how we can increase productivity. This has changed after not only our conversation, but also like in the market, talking to our customers. And the major topic and the major focus is safety, risk management, and quality. Risk management on the financial side, on the downtime side, and that includes also what you have presented on the change side. But like we are focusing on, as a manufacturer of machines, we are focusing on the development side before we are building the machines. So if you go to the next slide, please, we have an example how we are doing it at Digatron. For example, over here on a pouch cell. So we are starting the dry side. That means that we're starting on the anode and cathode cutting side. Previous topics which Kyle presented, mixing, changing chemistry, is impacting us later on. And that's the reason why a digital twin can allow us in the entire planning phase where we need to focus on safety, quality, and risk management. Hence, we are starting with single station units on cutting, and then we go through the entire process flow. This is like only for pouch. We have the same for prismatic and for cylindrical cells. And while we are having single station units for every process step, it helps us and the customer to really see on the development phase where they need to have automation, where they need to increase their safety aspects, where they need to change something before they're making the investment. And it's the reason why I'm talking about risk management from the beginning to avoid investments which they're later not being able to use or need to change when they have installed, when the customer has installed the units in the factory or in the development lab. So hence, we are going to the next slide, please, Kyle. We are having like the single station units on the lab side. Later on, we are going into the mass production, and that's the reason why the digital twin can also like increase the amount of cells you're producing every day. So you can scale it up, and you can see where in the process an automation makes sense, where you need to have like quality inspection in place in the process, as well as like where you need to increase the amount of machines to achieve your manufacturing output and quality you have promised to your end customer. So for example, we have over here like a C folding stacking unit where we have a digital twin on the right side below, where we started to simulate the entire process to do C folding above. So you can see below the digital twin is showcasing exactly what the machine at the end is doing when we have installed it at the customer side. And we are using the entire simulation for all machines along the entire process flow, which I have shown in the slides before. And we are analyzing where we need to increase speed, reduce speed, to have like for each and every process step, the entire quality parameters fulfilled. Kyle, would you like to go to the next slide? Perfect. And talking about then later on, while we're having like for each and every process step a single station unit, we can increase our capacities accordingly and automate it when we are like having the digital twin along the entire value stream. Hence, we are using the machines and putting them all together and doing the automation according to the customer's requirement, where they don't like to have like a manual handling. We're doing an automation and a converter belt handling. Once we have perfect, keep it as it is. Once we have manufactured our cells, we want to evaluate the cells. That means like not only like for incoming cells when we are having these cells outsourced, the manufacturing process outsourced, also like when we're producing cells before we go to the formation. What does it mean is on the left side, you can see like a conventional impedance point, 1 impedance point per kilohertz. With our system, which we are installing in, you can click on the right, Kyle, please. We can show 32 impedance points per second. This helps us to really evaluate the cells and predict the lifetime of the individual cell before we are putting them into a module and then later into the pack. When we go to the next slide, Kyle, you can see an example of like same cells which are coming from the same batch, but each and every cell is having different quality parameters. Hence, with a digital twin, we are like defining the ideal quality level of our cells, which we want to produce, and later on we can measure it against the reality. While you see on the left side, the batch 1 is having a longer lifetime, the batch 2 is having a shorter lifetime. Hence, we can do the cell grading and putting the batch 2 cells in the module and avoiding having batch 1 good cells or like optimum cells in a module and make the module and the pack at the end weak. And then on the right side, we can see the instant battery lifetime prediction. And this is running against the model which we have created in the digital twin, which runs against the reality. Those process steps are like possible to do the cell characterization of a single cell, or obviously with a string characterization where we're putting multiple cells into our system. And while we are doing the electrochemical impedance spectroscopy, we are measuring current, voltage, temperature, and cycling the individual cell through the required formation process and or for a lifetime prediction of the individual cell. If we go to the next slide, Kyle, this will help us, and most important, this shows the customer to avoid unnecessary formation and aging, which is one of the most expensive parts when you have produced a cell which is fulfilling the characterization which you have defined in your quality characteristic. Hence, we are installing like our EIS measurement system after the cell manufacturing process, before the formation, and according to the quality process definition also after the formation, before the aging. Coming back to the digital twin, what we are doing with the digital twin is like we are showcasing over here the entire process flow. Can you go back, please? One back. Thank you. What we are doing over here is like as a turnkey solution, we are showcasing the entire process flow. Important is for us to showcase not only the process flow, but also the modularity of the system. Hence, we're starting, when we're talking about a gigafactory, we're starting like with half a gig. And how does it look when we are increasing it later to 4 gigawatt, to 8 gigawatt? What do we need to do when it comes to firefighting strategies, ASIS systems, and trade convenience, as well as like the formation process, as well as like the aging process. So this helps us really to structure with the customer at the beginning the entire process, and this ensures then at the end that we are fulfilling what I said at the beginning: safety, quality, and a proper risk management, which is like also on the financial side, and at the end when the production is running on the downtime side. And with the digital twin, we are able to also like run the formation profiles against the reality, which we have in the cycler before. And then we are going into the mass production and define optimum of the formation profile and the formation process for the individual cell, while we are measuring the cell temperature, the voltage, as well as like the entire process flow during the formation process. Perfect, Kai. Thank you. Can you go to the next slide? Over here is an example, and I'm not sure, Kai, if this is like a video as well. We have like used the digital twin design to design a warehouse, to design like the formation process, to define the entire material movement between the individual steps before and after the formation and aging. Kyle, would you like to explain like how we have done it?
Yeah. So circling back to what I was talking about earlier in terms of this building block approach, going from the bottom up approach of what Digatron has been doing so far is we are simulating the PLC. Then we're simulating how the PLC actually moves mechatronics on that side of things. That was the single cell station that we looked at earlier. And then when you start to scale, you're using those same assets, but it's pulled from actual automation, actual characterized events from production, so that when you start to get to this throughput line design aspect of, okay, where are my bottlenecks? Do I need to add more pallets to the line or remove them? Do I need buffers? Or one recently was my anode and cathode coating line. My cathode is 3.1 meters and my anode mother roll is 2 meters. So even though they run at 80 meters a minute, you need a buffer on the one because the cycle time is going to be different when it comes to this. This is where you start to see those building blocks start to work together on the bottom-up approach. So what Digatron is doing here is they're simulating the individual assets for what that customer might need at a smaller scale, but you're able to reuse those tools, those problems that you've solved, in terms of how do those different assets work together on a larger plant system. And I've seen this used in terms of overall line design. I've seen this used in terms of what is my optimal shift schedule? Am I doing 2 or 3 shifts a day? What is my consumption rate? Do I need more bay doors in my building? It starts to get out of the manufacturing space into the whole holistic ecosystem of the battery production line in terms of what that looks like. The hallmark here is, the key takeaway here is a lot of what I had done and do see still to this day is we have these black boxes of assumptions, heuristics, gut feelings, and we say this is how, even in Excel or VBA code, this is how we think the process should work. Or you're in individual silos validating a thesis that you're predefining, and you're trying to actually validate an idea. When you start to use these together, you remove the heuristic nature of this. You're actually getting a data-driven approach in terms of, if I make this decision, to scale or to change something, what are the ramifications upstream and downstream? It makes a more data-driven approach for what line 2 or phase 2 might look like for your future design. And they're interconnected because they're all working to define a parameter set and they're looking to achieve a parameter set on the other end. So they're all working with the same, like we'll call it codex, for lack of a better term.
And when we're having the full picture of the entire factory in the system, we can also like do the intelligent formation in the individual modules when you are changing some parameters in your not only chemistry but also in your formation profile. So hence we can see which chambers are like having the most or the highest voltage range, highest current range. Accordingly, we can plan the material movement as well as like setting the parameters individually according to the changes we have made downstream, and then having the results later on in the next process steps already predicted in the digital twin, which gives us then also like really like the production output result before we are making the changes.
Yeah. And then aside from that, Myra, if we want to open up to questions, myself and Bjorn, we discussed leaving at least 20 minutes for the team to comment questions, anything in the chat, so we can openly discuss in a bit more organic nature any comments or anything that they would like to hear from us. And I'll flip back.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you both. Yeah, we have several questions, so I think the audience will be excited to go through a lot of what you talked about today. All right. So we're ready to go? And we can still see your screen, Kyle, or you think you're going back to the...
Oh, yeah, I'll bring my camera.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Do you want to come back on? Let's come back on stage. Let's chat. Let's chat questions. I'm going to try and group them. There seems to be a few themes within the audience, so I'll see if I can do my best to group the questions. All right. 15, 20 minutes of questions. It's like a thesis defense. Are we ready?
I'm all for it.
All right. So I've noticed a few questions coming in around chemistry, so upstream chemistry, and how this may affect the downstream processes. One specific question around line speed in chemistry. So let's start the discussion with how would, if we talking about beyond lithium, different chemistries, alternate chemistries, how does changing one element or parameter about within the chemistry impact the downstream processes?
Yeah, I'll take that one, Bjorn. This image here, I think, is a good depiction of that. So, like I mentioned earlier, you might change your chemistry. Therefore, you might have more metal in that composition when you're mixing or whatever that might be. That's going to change how your slurry, or if you're doing a dry process, how your compression is going to be forced on more metal to compress. So you might go from 10 tons of force to 40 tons of force. That changes how we program motors, how we program instruments. Can we even measure at that thickness of what you're trying to achieve? That's starts to be the downstream effect. So we can simulate in the front end engineering what should be my new compression force. We can go into our automation in our 3D environment and say, can I even achieve that? Can I turn the motor up high enough? Can I even get there? Where are my limiting factors there? And you can pre-validate that in some cases.
And plus, obviously, like changing the chemistry is having an impact, obviously, like when you're producing the cells, and also like when you're doing the formation of the individual cells, because like the formation profile will change or may change, and the formation process takes longer.
Okay. Thank you. And then, did you guys touch on so it's having an impact. You walked through. So specifically to line speed, that was are we able to comment specifics on line speed?
Yeah,
I'm not sure. Yeah.
I'll take a non-NDA IP tied answer to this one as best I can.
Okay.
So say you increase to a higher metal content, you need more force to do this. Um, if you're doing 80 meters a minute, or you're on the cutting edge and you're pushing 200 or so meters a minute on this, you're trying to balance these compression systems. And if they're off by any means, you have a shearing event. Um, but the force by which you press on those systems, you need to be able to attain that quality. So if you speed it up, that shear event becomes more likely, or might become more as an option when it comes to this. So in the simulation, you can say, if I speed this up, does my deposition on coating need to change to accommodate for this? Or if I speed up, can my pressure even attain what I need to without shearing the web, or something to that effect?
Okay. Thank you. I think that was a perfect segue into the next group of questions, Kyle. You read my mind. That was good. And for those that asked around chemistry, impact specifically around line speeds, please follow up with Kyle and Bjorn, and then they can chat more in detail if you have something specific in mind. The next group of questions is around digital twin simulation versus being able to predict catastrophic failures. This is close to my heart as a former expert witness with Exponent. So is there let me just read one of these questions specifically, but there's a group kind of around here. How can catastrophic failures, cell failures, be simulated? And how can you predict, perhaps, is there a way to predict the unpredictable? That's a tough question.
Yeah.
I would say, like, yeah, I mean, just like one comment, because like you have to, and it's like the big advantage, and I have seen in between like another question which I liked, is like how can you put into the digital twin different machine manufacturer equipment? So like, and this is important factor, because if you have just like one manufacturer in line, you can't predict, and that's the reason why it is so important in our point of view to have like really turnkey solutions and work with other companies together to really work on safety. And safety is the most important factor in the entire manufacturing process, because like if there is a fire or people are dying because of any kind of an event which would be possible to protect before, if you would plan it in a proper way, I would say like including the entire value stream in this digital twin makes sense to, at least foresee some catastrophic events. Just like my comment for Kyle's explanation on how to do it now.
Yeah. So catastrophic is a bit nebulous, right? But when it comes to this, what I will say is, in terms of the actual automation simulation, I'm seeing a big uptick on this being part of that conversation. So what do I mean by that? A startup and shutdown sequence is very coordinated for your production line. Say you lose a connection to an abatement system, let's say an ammonia scrubber on a coater. You cannot run that coater. If something fails on that, you do not want ammonia in that building. In formation, if you're simulating that process and you want to just check, hey, what happens if I lose connection to fire suppression? How does that affect my production line? Or if I have a thermal runaway event, how can I simulate that in terms of like a mass flow calculation and CFD modeling? That's a very advanced version of this example. Or it could be as simple as, I want to spin my blades at 1800 RPM. Can they do that under that strength tolerance, or am I going to shoot a blade through a wall here? Validating some of those catastrophic simulations where, no, you do not want to do that on the production floor doing DOE trials.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, Bjorn, I liked that you pulled in a couple of the other questions asked from the audience is this comes back to the full battery ecosystem, right? It's not just
Right.
one piece of equipment, it's everything. And bringing that together where it is different manufacturers, different equipment manufacturers. So that's a really good overview. Thank you both. And
And
I
I mean,
think
like it
the
helps us like,
yeah.
later on. I would like to say like having like the battery passport maybe at the end for every battery type, because you have like all the data in the process, and then you can combine it and have like really like the entire process from raw material up to like a formed and aged cell, which goes then later on into the module and pack to see like where in the process we had some quality related problems before we're having later on in a car a fire, or in a scooter, or wherever the battery is getting installed.
Mm-hmm. There's a question about battery passport, so that's really great. How does this tie? How does a digital twin? How can it tie into the battery passport and ensuring traceability throughout the life cycle? So I think you just touched on that.
Yeah, I would say
Perhaps a
like
little bit.
this is exactly where we need to. I think this helps to see like where we have a gap to have the full traceability in the process, and where we need to close the gap, and therefore like having the PLT speaking with each other, and having this like in a system above, and or in an MES system where you have where you can backtrack the entire manufacturing process and the raw material supply chain for the individual cells. So like you can really see where do we need to close the gap, and where as a customer I need to take care when I'm writing my RFQs for all the machine builders to produce a battery cell module and pack. But
Yeah,
Kyle.
I'll add to that a little bit. So what we're seeing in the industry with the advent of like what the compute can do and how we can send that up to these other systems, an explosion of integration. So in this, most of this was how do we tie the automation to simulation? So we're not working in silos and we're all working on the main product, as it were. You would be surprised how many times R&D is on like version 7 of a design. The mechanical process team are on version 5, and the controls folks are on like version 1 of like, I'm programming to this. I know you're way ahead of me. We'll figure that out.
Yeah.
But we're also tying in quality analytics, traceability and genealogy through MES and SCADA systems. We're seeing a massive explosion when it comes to this. And when you start to take all of that data and turn it into knowledge, say we time series adjust and label with traceability genealogy, yes, that's the passport in the nutshell. But you can take that data and then you can model it. From there, you can say if I go plus or minus, does it affect my quality? So the mechanism by which you're getting traceability genealogy, you can look at real world data and say, what was the quality ramification? What did I run at? If I change that based off that passport information, what can I do to better that? So here we have like optimize my plant, or we have Insights Hub Plant Sim. It pulls that data out of the PLC into that system and says, run it through your algorithm on how the line works in the digital twin.
Love it. Optimizing safety, quality, and cost
Exactly.
with this data. That's
And,
great.
and time.
Thank you.
Time is a big one.
Time.
Yeah.
That was going to be my next question, Kyle. You're in my head. It's kind of crazy. So there are a lot of questions around time. So how does this technology decrease time for X? One specific question, will this kind of technology allow formation times to be decreased? Maybe we can
I'll let you
talk
go first,
generally
and then I'll
around
chime in.
this.
That's a good question. I would say it will not decrease the time, because like when you're defining your parameters, which battery you want to produce, which chemistry you want to take, it takes the time it takes to form a battery. But having certain quality parameters in place, for example, our electrochemical impedance spectroscopy, can avoid unnecessary formation and aging of cells, which we can't use at the end. So like to reduce formation time, depends on the chemistry and like the cell type. But like having certain parameters in process will reduce the amount of unnecessary formed cells, which means like increasing yield.
Yeah, and more on the automation deployment side of things. The big metric out there by McKinsey and others is a 30% reduction in commissioning time. If you're doing that a lot ahead of time, yes, there is a front principle of putting time in to develop some of those models, or the bottom up is it generating itself for you. What I will say is it allows you to pre-commission a lot of the gigafactories. They're stick built on site. You don't just ship them down the street. They're all built there, and you can pre-commission and validate your programming ahead of time. And then also the sequence of operations. So say you're in formation, aging, and test, and you want to validate the optimal path for an ASRS pick and place to high temp, low temp, room temp. You can go through in simulations and say, if I take path A or B, what are the permutations? How do I optimize my travel time or reduce my travel time to take a few hours, days off of whatever your process might be?
Yeah, so like material movement, intelligent material movement, and intelligent placing of like the right current and voltage chambers for the formation, obviously, will reduce like the time to the formation process, but the formation process itself is getting defined by different parameters. But like for sure, what Karl is saying is absolutely right. It's like making the material movement smart and see like which kind of chamber is required for which kind of process step in the formation process and then in the aging. It's definitely like super helpful. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you both. I'm like, you're gonna see me keep looking. We're getting a lot of questions, so you guys are doing great. We have a few more minutes. Are you up for answering a few more?
Oh, yes.
All
Yep.
right. Okay, this is great. There's a lot of questions around, this slide specifically of, examples or, how many customers are implementing everything, all different processes at the same time simultaneously. Is there a process specifically that you would recommend to start with this technology? And then other questions around how is this technology being used in other industries, or any examples that you might be able to share. So let's start with perhaps within the full system, is there a process that you would recommend starting with specifically, or that would be most beneficial to start with?
Yeah, so it depends on who you are. I'll preface it with that. And also, I have a bit of a bias on like the manufacturing side of things, less on the chemistry development academia side of it. What I will say for those folks, the one that we've been doing in automotive, aerospace, semiconductor, food and beverage of old has always been this Technomatics plant sim. This is like the plant throughput. How many tools do I need? What's my throughput? But you tend to be populating parameters for a black box in the old style of things. The one that I ate, slept, and breathed for quite some time has been simulating the manufacturing automation and how it works together, especially if you're tool builder reliant. They know how that runs. You don't necessarily know how that runs. Treating that as a deliverable is very similar to like a CAD drawing or a 3D drawing today, to validate how that works with the other systems that are being orchestrated together. The other ones that are more like what we're using for like Pfizer or others in terms of like what are we doing for plastic development or what are we doing for those definitely, everything here, what I will say, is an actual running model of something that a customer is using. These are the ones that are not NDA tied. We have far more, especially in battery, that are tied to this. But the first step I tend to look for as a manufacturer would be, how does my line need to run and how are my assets going to be treating the automation? If I'm a tool builder, I want to make sure my tool can actually achieve the process. If I'm an R&D team figuring out lithium drift coefficients or the proper way for the SCI layer to be generated, they're going to care far more about these for the initial days. They're not so focused about what happens if I hit an e-stop. I'm just talking about a coin cell here. They don't really need to focus on those.
Okay. That's helpful.
Yeah.
So I think it depends on where in the process you are, who's asking that question. But I think for overall plant optimization, it's really focusing on each of these processes is important. Is what I'm hearing from you, Kyle.
It is. If you're, like I said, manufacturer, you're going to start here to figure out how many shifts, how many operators, how many assets can I do 40 gigawatt with what I'm proposing here. Then you tend to look deeper into, can we do this? Can we automate it? Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I know we're over time. There's a really fun question, and we have a world expert, a business expert. Are you guys up for one more question before we sign off today?
I'm all yours.
All right. I like it. So relative to this technology, this might be for Bjorn, since you have worked globally across the industry. Are you seeing that this technology can be used as an advantage regionally if you have a specific region ramping up that is adopting this technology and implementing it in their facilities? Is this being used globally, I think, is number one, or are you seeing that it's a regional trend?
Yeah, how should I answer it? Like, absolutely political correct. As I lived in India, you have like a bit more women and manpower over there, and labor is cheaper. So, like, obviously, in the Western world where you have like high cost labor, it makes absolutely sense to see like where you can have automation, where you can increase your process flow, because like every minute, every second costs money and makes the product more expensive. And at the end, an American produced cell will be not competitive. So like answering the question of like on the labor side, to not overdoing it now with the time, it's like a big advantage. And I would say like everywhere it is like really beneficial when we're talking about safety, because like every human is important, and therefore like safety is a major factor. So hence having a safe factory, a safe process is like the key benefit doing a digital twin, despite the fact of like optimization to be competitive wherever you're producing the cell.
It always goes back to optimization of safety, quality. I love it.
Right.
Thank you. That was a great answer. I know that was a challenging question, but I thought that was it was I appreciated the audience that were asking
Yeah,
about
thank you.
regional. Yeah, that's excellent. All right, we're over time. I'll let I'll let you go. Enjoy your day. For the audience too, wherever you are in the world. And just a reminder for those still on, we still have hundreds of people still on the line. The recording will be available, so please share with your network. Check in with Kyle and Bjorn if you have additional questions. And we look forward to seeing everyone at the next Volta Foundation event. All right, thanks so much again,
And
Kyle.
or the battery show.
Yeah, oh yeah,
And
we'll see everybody at the battery show.
So,
That's right. Yeah, the
perfect.
Volta Foundation
Thank you very
Lounge.
much.
Yeah. All right.
Perfect.
Talk to
We'll
you
all
guys
be
later.
there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Bye.
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 Thank you for watching. To learn more about this topic, check out the links in the description. And if you enjoyed what you saw, like the video and subscribe to the channel.